And welcome back to Ron Hasn't Seen. This week, we are going back to our Best Picture winners. This also ties into this month's theme of movies from the Great Movie Ride, and we are watching Sound of Music. And to discuss it here with me, we have WDWNT. He's the host of Disney Entertainment News Today, Deep in the Plus, and Park Center. We have Rob here. Hey, Rob, how's it going?
Really good, Ron. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I'm very curious about your show. I'm very excited about it. I'm shocked at the movies you haven't seen, man. I'm shocked.
So we're just going to get right into it here. The Sound of Music is the 1965 Best Picture winner, directed by Robert Wise, who also won Best Director for it. This is actually his second pair of these awards together, having won both for West Side Story just 4 years before. And I find it funny that both of them, the whole movie centers around a singing Maria.
I have a question for you. What is it that turned you away from watching this movie, man? Like, you watch everything. What is it about this one that you were like, nah, I don't want to sit down and watch it?
So in particular, I've said this before, and I didn't grow up as a big musicals person, and a lot of that was Rodgers and Hammerstein. I don't like that sing-songiness of a lot of their stuff, and this one isn't as sing-songy as some of the stuff I heard, but it really pushed me off of it, and I didn't get into musicals really until like after college when I have friends in theater in school, so they were doing Sondheim shows, and I got introduced to Rent, and Wicked is the first show I really remember going to see with my wife about 15 years ago. Not even that. Like, it was the first show I really went to see. I mean, I obviously had gone to see some shows before that. Like, obviously you'd see shows in school, and the only two I remember going to see on like I went to see Grease on Broadway with Rosie O'Donnell as Rizzo back when I was in high school, and seeing the producers on tour with,
Alan Ruck, is
I
that
think
his
it's
name?
Alan Ruck. Yeah. So those are the only two musicals I went to see really in theater before I met my wife, who's a big musical fan and got me more into things. So that's really why I hadn't watched this and watched a lot of musicals until now. And as I finish up this great movie ride month, my next month is going to be musicals. And you've seen this before, obviously, not just for this.
Correct. Yeah. My wife was a huge fan of Sound of Music, and The Wizard of Oz. Like, coming in, those were her two all-time favorite movies. And so, for me, I grew up with, my dad was a country music fan, but he also, for some strange reason, listened to a lot of like contemporary, like AC artists, like Barbara Streisand and Linda Ronstadt and some of those. And my mom was a huge musicals fan, like Big River, some other very classic. They used to go to New York all the time to see plays without me. And at some point, I just kind of got into musicals in general. You were talking about the kind of the opposite way. You weren't really into musicals. He used to take me. We used to see movie. We saw like Annie and some other stuff. And then, when Disney got into theatrical productions, I was all about going to see Aida and Beauty and the Beast. And, so musicals, I kind of love musicals. And I think it kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of that Disney stuff that is musicals. When you had Mary Poppins growing up, and some of the other, like, Little Mermaid, and, some of the real classic Disney movies, they're all musicals. So I love musicals. I just recently saw Beetlejuice the musical. We have a standing series where we go see musicals all the time. So I was drawn into this one because I love classic movies and I love musicals. But I think, I've never really, I don't think, sat down and paid attention to this movie the way I did when I was doing it for us to talk about it. So, I mean, I kind of saw it from a different point of view. There was some stuff that I didn't remember seeing the first time, and I'm also watching it with a more critical eye when I watch it.
Yeah, I really do think musicals have to come from somebody like to get you into them. I don't think there's something you just kind of discover on your own. Like this one, my wife is huge into them. Her father, grew up in New York. He was one of those kids who would stand outside stage doors to get people to sign things. Like upstairs, we have a Mary Martin signed Peter Pan LP that he got just by sitting behind stage doors. Somewhere we have a whole bunch of other records he has and playbills and things like that he had done. So she got it from that, and I've been getting it more from her. I don't always like everything she likes. I'm a little more picky with my musicals still, but I've definitely gotten more into them. And we had that same theater subscription kind of thing until we had, we have a 4-year-old, so that's almost impossible to do. Let's get back to the film at hand. So it won Best Picture, Best Director. It also won Best Editing for William H. Reynolds, Best Sound for James Cochran and Fred Hines, and Best Score for Erwin Kostal. Julie Andrews and Peggy Wood were both nominated for their acting, but didn't win. And it also had nominations for art direction, cinematography, and costume design. And this was back when they had both the black and white and the color, and this was for the color. The movie is based off the 1959 Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein play, with the book was by Howard Lindsay and Russell Krauss. It stars Julie Andrews as Maria, Christopher Plummer as Captain Von Trapp, whose singing voice was actually provided by Bill Lee, Peggy Wood as Mother Abbess, and Eleanor Parker as the Baroness Elsa von Schrader, and Sherman Carr as Liesel von Trapp. That's kind of our main cast here. There's obviously the more kids. I find it interesting that it won Best Score for Costal, but none of the songs were even nominated. Maybe because they weren't original for the film and they didn't want to do that at the time.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we've talked about it, that these songs are iconic. They're the ones that everybody knows. And so the idea that they would have been overlooked for an Oscar is kind of amazing. At the same time, you were talking about how Julie Andrews was nominated but didn't win. Do you think that had anything to do with the fact that she had just won the Best Actress for Mary Poppins, and maybe they were like,
I
we can't give it to her 2 years in a row?
honestly, I think 100% that was probably, yeah. The overlook of the songs I could only think is because they weren't arranged so differently from the stage show that they weren't considered original enough to be nominated. That's my best guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's very possible. That makes a lot of sense. It's an original, right? Isn't that
That's
the
yeah, because a score like a screenplay could be adapted, but it's always best original song, right?
yeah. No, you're right.
So
And as a matter of fact, I think that when they've been making this live action version of The Little Mermaid, there are some original songs, I think, because they want an Oscar nomination.
well,
Because again, they probably can't, they're not original if there's been a remake. So that you're probably right. That's why.
and for people who don't know, the story follows Maria. She's a nun in training who's a bit too lighthearted and flighty for the rest of the convent, so she's kind of sent off by the Mother Superior there to be a governess to the 7 Von Trapp children. Their father, he's a retired naval captain. He runs the family more like a crew than he does a family. He blows whistles to command the kids around. Everything's real strict. Almost, they're in uniforms. And she comes in and she injects music and levity into their lives and makes the entire house much more of a home. And this is going on while the captain is courting the Baroness, and they eventually get engaged. It's a cold relationship, and while this is going on, Maria falls for the captain. The actors weren't that far apart. I think we had just done this for an episode on this for Rob's show, Deep in the Plus, and we were saying like there's only 7 years
Yeah.
or so between them,
but there were 7 years between Liesel and Julie Andrews, and then or Maria, and then there's 6 years between the captain and Julie Andrews.
which is usually weirder because you usually see like the age difference in some of these being very autumn spring. Like obviously the characters are decades apart in age, but the actors are closer, which is usually kind of the opposite of what you see.
Right. Like
He's got
Phantom Menace.
Phantom Menace is such a weird thing because like they cast her too old for she was what 17, 18, supposed to be playing a 14-year-old, and Jake Lloyd was supposed to be was what like 6 or 7, and he was supposed to be playing a 9, 10-year-old.
But when you talk about those relationships, that's the one I think of cinematically that's just off-putting. It just makes you feel dirty. That's that relationship, knowing that that's going to be a couple. And with this one, I buy into the fact that this could be a thing. And maybe you're right. Maybe it's because it's the stereotype of the, older man and the younger woman. But I mean, they weren't that different in age. So
I mean, yeah, I mean, she's supposed to be in her like what, like 22, maybe. If she was like a young orphan who like was kind of sort of raised by the convent, then decides to join it, like out of common obligation, and she really doesn't belong there, so that's why she's sent off. So she's got to be young, and he's got daughters close to her age.
it's always weird when you go back and do a deep dive into these things and see the actual ages versus what the ages they're portraying on the screen. But I think that Julie Andrews does such a good job of being that kind of parental figure to them, and at the same time not seeming like she's as old as she is, because she's 30 when this is
Yeah,
actually being shot. So she doesn't seem like she's 30. But then again, Liesel is supposed to be 16 going on 17. She certainly looks a little bit closer to her actual age, which was more like 24.
yeah, and the fact that she plays it so young, I think, is a real testament to Julie Andrews, because in Mary Poppins, she's
Yeah,
playing a little older than she is when she's playing essentially the same kind of character, just more proper about her. And they're a year apart. Mary Poppins was filmed before this. It's the difference in the way she plays it truly shows how great of an actress and how much of a international treasure she is. So she falls in love with the captain, and she can't stand being around him if he's going to get married. So she runs back to the convent. But then she's convinced to go back and at least take care of the kids. But then when she comes back, the captain realizes he's really in love with her. The Baroness sees it. She just kind of leaves. They get married really quickly, go on a long honeymoon. And then the Nazis just kind of absorb Austria into Germany, and they want to basically draft him back into the service to captain one of their ships. But he is very staunchly been anti-Nazi the whole thing, and decides they're just going to run off and flee to, I think in the film it's Switzerland,
yep.
which if you know anything about geography, Salzburg's here. Switzerland is about 300 miles this way. In reality, they hop on a train and go. The real family that this is based off just hop on a train and went to Italy. But they escape, and it's the happy ending, and now they're a happy family. The film is just beautifully scenic, and I think that's really one of the things that most stood out to me is that as much as Christopher Plummer and Julie Andrews are the stars, I think Austria shines more than anything else in this film. And I don't think it would have worked if you just filmed it on sets or tried to do with, oh, there's mountains outside LA. We could just use those. I don't think that works in this case. I think having it filmed on site is one of those things that really sold this film to people.
One of the things that when you're talking about that is I'm so, we're all parks people when it comes to like Disney parks. I'm so tuned into seeing castles from the sky and immediately thinking of Soarin'. And so as we're coming across those majestic views, it felt very much like Soarin' to me, the Soarin' around the world. But at the same time, as we hone in on that iconic scene with her spinning in the field, and they're showing kind of this little provincial town, I'm thinking Beauty and the Beast opening, like it kind of opens to me like Beauty and the Beast. And then there's a scene where she's walking through the trees that feels very much like it's right out of Sleeping Beauty, which was 6 years before this. So there's a lot of things that feel very familiar to me from other movies in this. But again, that panning across the countryside reminded me of doing the Soarin' attraction at a Disney park.
Obviously, I had seen this one before, but everybody knows that number of her spinning on the hillside. It's
Sure.
one of the most iconic shots in any movie ever. It's in my logo for the channel. I was surprised that that's what they opened with, honestly. I did not expect, boom, here you go. Here's the most iconic thing you're going to see.
Yep, kind of like the Lion King in that Circle of Life intro, right? It's like they grab you from the beginning.
The musical numbers, I really enjoyed most of them. I grew up knowing these songs, even not knowing the film, just because you sing them in school or they've been turned into standards and sung by other people. What kid doesn't spend half of kindergarten music class singing Do Re Mi? And like things like Family Guy and other shows just reference these songs so much that So Long Farewell, Edelweiss, help me, I'm just blanking on these, Rob.
How do you solve a problem like Maria, climb every
Yeah,
mountain?
and I said, like, I grew up with that one because my mom's Maria and my uncles and even my dad would just sing that song as kind of a joke to her. Like everything, like in this, so many of these songs, 16 going on 17, all over, like they just hit you
Edelweiss.
one after the other,
Yeah.
and they're all really well done. There's not over the top choreography, but there's like as they're going around the gazebo, there's cool choreography and doing different things, but it's not a dance show at all. It's not Music Man. It's not you don't have lines of tappers and swing dancers and ballet dancers
Yeah.
everywhere. It's something that focuses on the music.
Yeah, I think,
Well,
and I mentioned before that I feel like these songs move the story along as opposed to being these show-stopping numbers where people stop and dance. Like, that's how you know in the Enchanted movie, like how
yeah,
everything's dancing and singing and all that kind of stuff. There is minor choreography that they do, but it's almost as if that's like part of what the kids would do, right? Like the whole up the stairs thing that they do, or the popping out from behind each other's backs, that kind of stuff that kids might think was cool to do on their own. So I think it all fits and makes sense in
it's organic.
in that scale. Yeah, exactly. Perfect word.
As
Organic.
opposed to I just did a few weeks ago. I did Spotlight Parade. I know you're familiar with that from the Great Movie Ride. Have you ever
Yeah.
actually seen the film?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. My son and I were like, let's watch it because it's Great Movie Ride. And then afterwards we're like, well, we've done that.
Right, like all the musical numbers. I mean, there's a couple little things, but they're all cramped right at the end, and the whole thing is contrived to show you the musical numbers and the dancing. We're 30 years apart. That's was one of the first real musicals because that was right after talkies came in, and just to see how they've evolved in that time period, they couldn't be any further apart. It's like feeling organic, where the characters there's diegetic and non-diegetic music in movies, and diegetic is, I believe, I might have these backwards, but one of them is music the characters can hear, and one of them is music the characters can't hear. Like Star Wars would be, I believe, the non-diegetic. Nobody hears the Imperial March when Vader walks in a room, even though I'm guessing he probably would be playing it on his little computer here. But to this, like some musicals, when they jump out and go to these big musical numbers, you feel it's almost like the Imperial March. It's not something like the world around them hears. It's they do the musical number, then they go back to being what they were. In this, all the musical numbers are being sung and it's being acknowledged, and it's not just out of nowhere with the people dancing off tables, running down bowling lanes, or whatever you want to do. It's
Yeah. No, you're
real
right.
in a certain way.
It makes sense. The only number that bothers me, and you were mentioning choreography, was the 16 going on 17, because there's some weird like movements that they do when they're inside the gazebo that I'm just like, what are you guys doing at this point? Everything else seems very, as you've used the word, organic. Whether it's her teaching the kids how to do the do re mi, or them doing their thing up the stairs, everything there seems organic, except for that scene. For some reason, the dancing in that one, when I watched it this time, sort of threw me off. I was like, what are they really doing? Like they would disappear from the camera and then they would come back into the camera, disappear from the camera and come back into the camera.
And I think I just said, like, it's the only one that had real choreography to me. It's nice to have a little bit of that, and it wasn't so blatant as some movies do. So I don't think it pulled me too far out of it. The scene was shot a little differently than things around it too. And speaking of things that were shot really differently, one that was really stands out as Climb Every Mountain is shot in almost pitch blackness at times. It's just
Right.
dark and does not fit the tone. I just think that one was weird. Another one that stands out was the puppet show with the lonely goat herd. That's in a way it's choreography because they're puppets and singing and like, but it's still they're putting on a show. They're not just breaking into it randomly.
Yeah, I agree with you, and that was one that I was surprised that I didn't remember as much about it, and maybe I just like tuned out the first time I saw it. But I mean, the marionette part of that is far and above anything I've ever seen a marionette show do before. I mean, the eyes, like the cheeks popping in and out when they were playing the music, and the little goats wiggling their tails. It was really amazingly well done, especially for kids 5 to 16 years old.
I knew the song. I didn't know there was a puppet show in it. And we're watching the credits, and I think it says puppeteers. I'm like, wait. I look at my wife. I'm like, what? The puppeteers? Suffice to say, this movie is a classic. It's iconic from so many, from the music to the opening shot, and it was a huge hit when it came out. Had an $8.2 million budget, which is pretty high at the time. I don't know if that includes the $1.25 million it took to buy the rights for the stage play. On its own is a almost staggering amount for what it was. But it grossed over, and this is over the course of everything, but it grossed over 280 million worldwide. Like,
Talk about a return on investment. That's awesome.
it's huge. Can you imagine like what are our biggest movies like Avatar? That movie cost so much it would have had to make what like 15 billion to be the same kind of like ROI percentage. It's insane.
Yeah, I mean, again, paying 8 million for a movie and getting 156 million at the box office in 1955 is I mean 65 is kind of crazy.
This reminds me of like the Saw movies. Like they cost 5-10 million to make 200 million at the box office over their runs. It was a worldwide hit. It wasn't just the U.S. Almost everywhere liked it, except Austria really didn't feel was very Austrian. They really kind of rejected the film. They love having the 300,000 tourists come by every year to visit Salzburg. It passes, the town was known for Mozart visitors, but this passes that. One of my favorite stories is it was a huge hit in South Korea, and theaters were basically showing it around the clock. They couldn't get enough showings in. And then one theater owner in Seoul decided he's going to re-edit the film, make it a little shorter than its close to 3 hour runtime, so he can get more performances in every day rather than just like at a stretch you're getting what, six. So he was trying to get more in, so he edited it out, and apparently he edited out most, if not all, of the musical numbers. So there goes the Sound of Music from the Sound of Music. Yeah, I would definitely go see this on stage if I had the chance. It's not something that they bring back in Toro. I think it's like, yeah, we can't do better than the movie. Let's just let this one sit.
Well, sometimes they try to do it anyway, like Seussical.
Yeah, they did
Just
the
kidding.
one of those live musicals on TV a few years ago of this one, and I think I
Yeah,
watched a
the
couple minutes of it.
the
But
Carrie Underwood movie or version
yeah,
of it. She was not any more Austrian than Julie Andrews was.
I mean, can you imagine someone with like a Schwarzenegger accent singing everything? It just doesn't work.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I mentioned that like when I'm looking through and I saw like reference material for this, I saw that there was an anime that I'd be interested in seeing. That there's an anime version of The Sound of Music. Yeah, it's
Uh,
called the Trap Family Story is the name of the anime. So if you end up getting
well, I
into that,
believe that's Maria von Trapp's memoir was basically the same thing. And so the film is based off her memoir, which is a fairly true story. This the original play was very closely based off the German film, which came out in 1956, which was in turn very closely based on Maria von Trapp's memoirs, which they bought from her for $9,000.
oh wow.
Flat out, no more rights. She just sold off every right to the thing for that. She was just trying to make some money after her husband died, and that was what happened. So they really did attempt to lure. He wasn't a naval captain. He was, I think he might have been a retired military officer, but he was also part of the fallen Austrian aristocracy. They really did have to flee rather than have him get drafted to be a U-boat captain, which is I think what they wanted to do. And she really was a nun. And as I said, they didn't flee the way they did in the movie. They basically got on a train and went to Italy, where they had a way to get citizenship, And once they got the Italian passports, they came to the US. So they said it was, the film, she sold her rights to a German producer who made a 1956 German film. And then Paramount bought the rights from them at the same time. And they wanted to make the movie with Audrey Hepburn. And I could have seen that working in a slightly less musical version of it.
She
Um,
seems like she would have been a better version of the Baroness than Maria.
I see that, but I also see very Holly Golightly kind of had that same attitude and like that lust for life. So Paramount was going to make it with Hepburn, and that fell through. But the director and the producer wanted to, they thought it would make a good Broadway musical, so they hired Howard Lindsay and Russell Crouse to write the musical, who in turn went to Rodgers and Hammerstein to do it. And this entire thing was originally supposed to be a vehicle for Mary Martin on stage, and she did play Maria, and that went on to win 6 Tonys. Within a year of being put on Broadway, Fox bought the rights from them, who now had all the rights, for 1.25 million and 10% of the gross of the film.
Well, so, as long as somebody made some money.
Somebody made a lot of money on that. So much of the exterior was shot on location in Austria, but most of the interiors and the outdoor scenes, like the gazebo, were done on the Fox lot in LA. As I said, Salzburg still gets there's tours. They started in the 70s where they would just go around and visit all these sites. And I mean, that's kind of the history of this. And I think we've really kind of talked about things we really like. That we both really like the movie. Is there anything you could think of that you'd really want to bring up from it?
No, just I think in general, it's one of those movies where I feel like it's part of, and I think we've already said this in a lot of ways, it's part of the culture. And I think if you haven't watched this movie, you've kind of missed out on a little bit. You knew what you wanted to know about this movie already going in, even though you hadn't seen it. You knew some of the songs or most of the songs, and you knew what it was about and all that. So to me, I think it's one that I'm glad you got a chance to see it. I'm sure it's not one that's going to be on your regular rotation, but I think same for me. I liked going back to it, watching it a little more critically, looking for things in it. But I think in general, it's good. I'm glad I watched it, but I'm not sure that I probably need a break now that I've seen this 3-hour phenomenon. It'll be a while before I watch it again.
Yeah, it's definitely something I'm very glad I watched. I'm not going to watch over and over again, but it's not like I did Shakespeare in Love a few weeks ago, where it's just like, how did this win the Oscar? I'm not watching this again. This totally deserves all the praise it gets. It really is beautiful. Even it feels long at 3 hours, but it doesn't feel poorly paced at 3 hours. It just feels like they put a little too much into it. And I mean, that's a lot of music, and the musical numbers go through the entire show, as opposed to a lot of musicals like dry up in the second and third acts, when they're just trying to like rely heavy on plot. This does a little bit, but it's still like up until the moment they escape, they're on stage singing. I would definitely recommend seeing this as you said, part of the cultural zeitgeist for years. Like, so much of this movie, even if you haven't seen it. So just go ahead and watch it and understand these references you catch in all these little shows. It's one of those things people just think everybody knows, so they're going to just make a metaphor for this movie at different times. But hey, Rob, thank you for coming on.
Hey, buddy,
Really enjoy
anytime.
this. Love, always love talking movies with you, and I think we're back on your show in just a couple weeks again.
Mando, we're doing that on May the 3rd. You've watched the whole series? Are
Yeah,
you
I finished. I finished. It came out. We're filming this on the day season 3 finished up, and that was like, I watched it before work this morning.
Yeah. Well, hold all comments until we get to talk about it on Deep in
Yeah.
Plus.
Thank you guys for watching. If you like what I'm doing here, please, subscribe to the channel, like the video. Check out a lot of the stuff I don't think I've mentioned on the channel before, but I've been involved with WDWNT for over a decade at this point. Mostly now I'm just occasionally guesting on Rob's shows, with Deep in the Plus, which airs pretty much every Wednesday. The Disney Entertainment News Today comes out Tuesdays. Park Center is Sundays. Check it
Yeah.
out on WDWNT TV, not the main channel. So check those out. If those are all mostly Disney parks based, the Disney Entertainment News Today talks about movie news. Deep in the Plus talks about shows that are specifically shows and movies that are specifically on Disney Plus. So check those out. And thank you guys, and have a good night.
Bye.